Perfect, perfect. Welcome everyone to the discussion. This discussion is, one second. All right. Welcome to the discussion. My name is Maurice JeRod. We got my co-host JeRod Lindsay. Our guests this evening, we have Dr. Eric Jackson and Dr. Earl Wright. I'll let these gentlemen introduce themselves. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Earl Wright.
Good afternoon. First, thank you, gentlemen, for inviting me to speak with you on this very important and timely topic on this Juneteenth in the year 2020. My name is Earl Wright II, professor of sociology, currently at the University of Cincinnati, but soon to be Rhodes College in Memphis, Tennessee. Just a little bit about my background. I've been in the profession 20 years now. Have spent time at Central Florida, where I began, but also at two HBCUs, Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and Texas Southern University. And throughout my career, my primary focus has been on the scholarship of the contributions of Blacks to American sociology, and really highlighting their accomplishments in ways that traditional sociologists or non-Black sociologists have not done. And what we find is that many of the accomplishments and traditions within the discipline were actually started by early Black sociologists. But unfortunately, until recently, they have not received their due credit. So that's been my research broadly, and more specifically, it's been on W.E.B. Du Bois and his contributions to the discipline. And I guess we'll get into that in a few minutes after the introductions are done.
Certainly, certainly. Thank you, Dr. Wright. And then second, Dr. Eric Jackson.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Dr. Eric Jackson. I'm professor of history at Northern Kentucky University. Got my PhD from the University of Cincinnati. I've been at Northern Kentucky University for 28 years. Also director of the Black Studies program there. Our research focuses on a number of issues, from African-American education to the history of the Underground Railroad to peace studies to history of race in the Americas. It's just all over the place. I'm at the point in my career, I just write what I choose to write. I just finished a book on race, ethnicity, and immigration. And so that's me.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. JeRod, take it away.
Man, I'm overly excited. Excited. First and foremost, man, just to have you all here, you scholars here, to speak on Juneteenth, especially in the time, as Dr. Wright stated, in a timely manner, where jobs are all of a sudden giving employees days off, and the country is ready to acknowledge Juneteenth as a holiday somewhat. So I just want to thank you two for taking time out on this holiday to celebrate with us and educate our people. As you both know, we are here to discuss Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, specifically their thoughts on what will propel the Black race forward. Dr. Eric Jackson, if you don't mind, can you give us some background on Booker T. Washington and his thoughts on what will propel or what was best for the Black race?
So let me place this into a bigger context first. You have to understand, Booker Washington was born in 1856. He was born into enslavement, and he dies in 1915. So some of his lenses are driven by that early experience as a person of color who's enslaved. And his perspective was on education, particularly vocational education from a youth. So his perspective was deposited in a time period in which the history of the country was dominated by this falsehood of the legal structure of separate but equal. The system of Plessy v. Ferguson, coming out of the Civil War from far back in the Reconstruction. So his world was kind of dominated by this falsehood being separate but equal, meaning the races were separate, but they were never equal. And so his lenses is colored by that, meaning he would argue that African Americans needed to focus on a type of education that was primarily vocational. Find a trade. That trade would give you the leverage to turn that trade into a business. That's why, for example, in 1901, he creates what's called the the Negro Business League, where he wants African Americans to create their own businesses, be entrepreneurs, and that was the way to deal with racial segregation. Own your stores, own your businesses, put those businesses in the Black community, because the system of racial segregation in his mind, at least he's saying this publicly, is not going to change, that racial segregation would not change. And again, I want to focus on that he's saying this publicly. What he's doing privately is a whole different matter.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you for that, Dr. Jackson. Dr. Wright, can you give us some perspective on W.E.B. Du Bois and his train of thought?
Sure. When we talk about W.E.B. Du Bois, we need to narrow down which Du Bois we're talking about. Unlike Washington, Du Bois was born 3 years after slavery, and even more distinctful in who he became. Du Bois was raised in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, in the North, in an abolitionist town where Blacks were not necessarily under the foothill of oppression as much as Blacks in the South. Although they were under that type of oppression, the degrees differed. He was encouraged to pursue an education, unlike Blacks in the South. So we have to think about which Du Bois, born in 1868, and he died the morning of the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King gave the famous, iconic, I Have a Dream speech. So he lived basically from the footprint of slavery to the modern civil rights movement. Over that time, his views and thoughts on America changed. He began in a very a conservative fashion, believing in the American dream more than white Americans believed in that dream themselves. Eventually, over time, he began to think differently about this notion of American exceptionalism, American equality, the rights between all men that are created equal, but he found through his research that they were not. When we look at his attention to educational philosophy, he's almost exclusively known for his emphasis on the liberal arts. He believed that the way in which Blacks would prove they were equal, the way in which Blacks would be successful, is to become trained through secondary education, post-secondary education, and you will prove to white people that you're just as smart, just as intelligent, and hopefully that will encourage them to lift their boots off of our backs. If you're thinking about the way in which Martin Luther King Jr. said, a man can only hold you down if you allow them to, if you bend over. So he wanted Blacks to have education to lift themselves up. But what we find eventually in the later years of Du Bois is that he was more of a proponent of vocational and technical education. Although he was never specifically opposed to vocational education, he just prioritized liberal arts first before vocational.
Okay, thank you both for that. I want to get right to the meat of it, right? From YouTube's perspective, and I'll go right back to you, Dr. Wright. What do you think W.E.B. Du Bois, throughout his time frame, he created or he was a co-founder of the NAACP. Do you feel like obviously he had credits, but do you feel like he was right in his sentiment? What are your thoughts on, was he right, was he wrong? What could he have done better looking at hindsight, in your opinion?
I honestly believe, well, I try not to second guess historical figures who are operating within the constraints of their time. Mm-hmm. It's easy for us to look back and say, you know, I'd never be a slave. I would have told master this, master that.
Right.
Yeah, and you would be dead, you would get that whip, or an immediate family member would have been killed.
Yep.
While you think you're being this braggadocious 21st century person.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and to sidetrack for a second, which I hate to do, but that's why I really dislike when I see T-shirts that I saw on social media saying something to the effect of this, paraphrase it. Don't mess with me. I'm not my grandparents.
We're not our ancestors. We are not our ancestors.
Exactly. With the assumption that they did not fight back. They fought back in the way they were able to, using the tools and resources they could at that time. So when we talk about Du Bois and when we look back on his works, he was a person certainly of his era. Again, coming out of this time when it was believed that if you simply become educated, then the world would be fine. Everything would be okay. That's what he pushed. And I do want to make it clear that if you read The Souls of Black Folk and The Talented 10th, you will find that he was not opposed to vocational education. He simply thought that you should prioritize the liberal arts first before vocational. And it seems to make sense. how can you become a business person if you can't add or subtract money, if you can't read a contract? So we tend to have these two figures as antithetical to each other, when in fact, they were very much similar. Even when you talk about Washington, and I can do that in a few minutes, but to get on to the liberal arts, it really gets to his notion of the talented 10th. The idea that we need these liberal arts trained individuals within our communities. And there are some of us who must be, take up that mantle, carry that flag to be the leaders of our society. But before I conclude, just one thing: the talented 10th does not refer to 10% of a population. When I give my students a test or essay test, I tell them flat out, if you write an answer that says the talented 10th refers to 10% of the population, you're failing that test. It simply means those of exceptional ability, the exceptional persons of any art, whether it's education, whether it's music, whether it's sports, whoever that talented person is, they should be willing to be self-sacrificing to lead the masses. It's okay for 9 of the people in the community to go on about their life, be oblivious to what's going on. But for that exceptional person, they must be the one to pick up the mantle and push, in this era, what he thought was the best path to success, which was liberal arts.
Thank you for that, Dr. Wright. Dr. Jackson.
Yes.
What do you think in regards to Booker T's stance and how it applies today? What are your thoughts on Booker T's stance?
I echo the same sentiment of Dr. Wright. It's hard to judge folks outside of their particular context, and mine's a little more broad, because I make the argument to my students that they kind of feed off of each other. It's not an either or, it's a both. There's no right way. There's no Harriet Tubman without a Frederick Douglass. There's no King without a Malcolm. There's no Du Bois without a Booker T. I mean, they kind of have to figure out the best way in their minds to move the race forward, whatever that is. And so we're trying to analyze folks and trying to project back on them, and they're going the opposite direction, meaning what are the skill sets in the best way, at least for Washington, when a vast majority of African Americans do not have access to higher education? How do you move folks forward? So the other side of that is Du Bois talking about those folks having access to higher education. And I think they feed off of each other. There's no right way of doing this. They're all in the same boat. How do you do this? There's no plan. There's no, okay, back in the day, this is what we did. There's none of that during their times. Okay, let's figure out how this works for this time, in this moment, in this generation, and the next generation.
That's fair. That's fair. Thank you. Dr. Wright, you mentioned Washington. Did you want to chime in real quick with any thoughts that you had on Washington, or should we come back to that?
Well, sure. Again, we tend to want to minimize or simplify, rather, is a better way of saying it, the way we think of Du Bois and Washington, especially as it relates to this battle. To reemphasize again, Du Bois did not oppose vocational education. And on the other hand, Washington did not totally oppose liberal arts education. And here's the kick. And this is a shameless self-promotion for my book that just dropped a few weeks ago from the University of Cincinnati Press. And the title of it is Jim Crow Sociology, the Black and Southern Roots of American Sociology. And in this book, I point out, I provide data and evidence that Washington was really an undercover supporter of the liberal arts, in so much as it helped him accomplish his individual goals. Now, whether those goals were selfish and self-serving, you know, individuals can be the judge, but he did implement aspects of liberal arts. And what do I mean? The major finding in my book is that the first program of applied rural sociology was established in 1892 at Tuskegee. In the early Tuskegee Negro conferences, as they were called, they had what they mentioned as 1 day of practical sociology, to where they were basically taking the skills out of the classroom, the knowledge of how to interact with persons within the societies, the communities around Tuskegee, and implement those. That was sociology. If you look at American sociology in general, or white sociology, again, Tuskegee started in 1892. sociology, rural sociology did not establish itself until 1912 with the American Sociological Association as a component, a slice of American Sociological Association. The Rural Sociological Society didn't start till 1937. So what Washington did was around 4 decades prior to the regular establishment of rural sociology. So he was implementing aspects of the liberal arts to help him accomplish his goals. And what he did was very phenomenal. So I would obviously encourage people to go buy the book. It's at your local publishing company, Amazon, all that. So feel free to read about it.
Mo just put it in there, and I know he's gonna put Dr. Jackson's book in there a little bit later as well. I want to follow up because before I went to college, so shameless plug, I wanted to let people know, Dr. Wright was my first Black male teacher, and this was in college. So when I went to college, I didn't know what sociology was. So Dr. Wright, for some people who may not know what sociology is, can you kind of explain what that discipline is?
And also, and might I add, also, this is the difference, because some people I've learned that they tie it with psychology. So if you could just say the differences between the two.
Mm-hmm. Sure. In a very simple term, sociology is the study of human behavior and interactions and patterns. And we try to come up with theories and explanations for why we do what we do. Psychology, as best I understand it, focuses more on an individual, psychological, intellectual assessment of persons, where in sociology we look to focus on institutions and large-scale matters of solving social inequality and social problems.
Appreciate that. Dr. Jackson.
Yes.
What's going on today, right? What is your take, if you can place yourself in the shoes of a Booker T or even a W.E.B. Du Bois, right? What do you think would be the best way to propel the Black race forward? What would be the priority? Would it be education, or would it be owning Black-owned businesses?
It's both. It's
okay.
both. It's all of it. It's all of it, plus other components that people don't really talk about. It's healthcare. You have huge disparities in healthcare for African Americans. There's so many other layers of what it takes. So you have to have a multi-layer, multi-component plan. It can't just be one avenue. It's got to be all the avenues pushing together at the same time, making progress. So, it's like, I was just reading this book by the prominent historian Mary Frances Berry, when she talked about her being involved with numerous civil rights movements, social movements. She made the argument, and it didn't dawn on me, but I was looking at it before.
What's the name of the book, Dr. Jackson? I'm sorry.
Oh gosh, I'll get back to you. I just can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
But she was making the argument that protests by itself, particularly when Dr. King was involved with the Montgomery bus boycott at the age of mid-20s, that even though you got the right to vote, protest is also part of that piece, because that's a way of putting pressure on folks, putting pressure on politicians, putting pressure on the system. But at the same time, you have this mechanism of voting to put people out of these positions you don't want them to be in, because a lot of the issues are local. Like, if you don't like the prosecutor, that person is local. If you don't like a judge, that person is local. And they're being voted in and out of office. So you have the power and the mechanisms to protest for pressure, and you have the power and mechanisms to vote people in and out of office. And so I think, again, if you're using the dichotomy of which is first, education or owning business, they work hand in hand. Like Dr. Wright was talking about earlier, you have to have the skills to read a contract. How are you going to figure out contracts and money if you don't have the skills? And so they kind of work hand in hand.
And if I can just follow up with that, when you think about the choosing the best way of moving forward, I believe one of the traps we've gotten into is exactly that particular question. What is the best way? There is no the best way. And that's one of the more beautiful aspects of the Reconstruction era before the Southern Democrats,
Right.
Well, yeah, another story.
Yeah, I know.
One of the beautiful of that era was you had all these options, different ways of being successful. Now it's either, we're telling kids for the most part, if you don't go to a 4-year college, you're a failure. If you go to community college, we're going to ridicule you. Oh, you're just going to community college. You're not smart. No. If we think back to Reconstruction, emancipation, after Juneteenth, the 13th Amendment, we had in Atlanta University, which now Clark Atlanta University, preparing students to be teachers, preparing them to be social scientists, preparing them to use the scientific method to better understand their communities so they can improve their way of life. That was led by W.E.B. Du Bois. You had Booker T. Washington using, with a common sense way of looking at the world. Use the skills you have already. If you know how to build houses, how to be a blacksmith, use that talent. Become an entrepreneur because you're making money for yourself. So he does that at Tuskegee University. And Tuskegee, that program, the applied sociology program they had, they traveled all over the South, teaching different communities those skills. And also they had people traveling from all over the South and also parts of the North and West to come to Tuskegee that once a year for their conference to learn those skills. Add to that, Atlanta focusing on urban, Tuskegee focusing on agriculture. You had Hampton University focusing on industry with President Armstrong, President Armstrong at Hampton. So there were different ways, multiple spokes, and the theological schools. There were different and acceptable ways of Blacks becoming successful. I argue that we need to become as accepting and embracing of those different ways and not necessarily ridicule our young brothers and sisters who may be more adept at their hands than with coming up with complex formulas to figure out Newton's law of gravity.
So let me ask you this. Can you give us some background on the Reconstruction era? Just whatever you can give us, just tidbit.
We have a very diverse audience, so
for sure, obviously, right? Obviously, but I think this is important,
You want the short version or the long version?
Obviously, it's gonna be the short version, but the fact is, I think this right here, this screenshot of you two laughing when I'm asking, because the Reconstruction era is so critical to Black history, and the fact that wasn't taught to me in none of my lower education. Or it wasn't taught to me in a sense that I could remember it, right? And I know it wasn't taught to some of the people I'm with on a regular basis. So, Dr. Jackson, if you can give us a short version.
I'll give you the real short version. So from a time period standpoint, the Reconstruction era is 1865 to 1877. This little short time period where you have the 3 Reconstruction amendments, the 13th Amendment, the 13th Amendment in 1865, the 14th Amendment in 1868, and the 15th Amendment that gave African-American men the right to vote. Every time I teach Reconstruction, I say the 15th Amendment in 1870 gave African-American, in theory, the right to vote. Black women didn't receive the right to vote until the 19th Amendment in 1920. And people are so amazed because they think the 15th Amendment gave all Black people the right to vote. And so you have these Reconstruction amendments in this short little time period of being coupled together and trying to reconstruct a nation that had been ripped apart by the American Civil War. And African Americans during that time, they become entrepreneurs, they become politicians, not just locally, nationally. They're in Congress for the first time. There's the first time that during the Reconstruction period, the first lieutenant governor and governor of a southern state. It doesn't happen again until, I think, H. Douglas Wilder in 1989, I think. 1989 is Wilder. And so during Reconstruction, you have all these African Americans in these key positions that they're progressing. Mm-hmm. But surely they're progressing because if you look at it from a historical standpoint, you had African Americans up until the 13th Amendment, a little over 4 million are enslaved. And so the Reconstruction period kind of opens up these avenues that haven't been there before and they take advantage of them. But on the downside of it, there's a huge backlash very quickly for political, economic, and totally racist reasons.
Totally racist reasons. I'm glad you said that.
It's not a happenstance that as soon as Reconstruction occurs in 1865, the first Ku Klux Klan is created in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1866. That's not an accident at all. It is not an accident.
Let me go ahead, Dr. Wright.
And just to tie this in, there is a great short little comedy bit that Blackish ran a few years ago, featuring the Roots. So it gives you a short, concise, maybe 2 to 3 minute overview of the Reconstruction era and the backlash, and it's kind of funny too.
I appreciate you, Doc. So Dr. Jackson, to recap, the Reconstruction era was about 12 years, right?
Correct.
And right after the beginning in 1865 of the Reconstruction era, the next year, the Ku Klux Klan was created to combat that, right?
Correct.
And then the beginning of the Reconstruction era, all of these things for Black people were beginning to open up seemingly in the country, right?
Correct.
Does that seem like kind of what we're going through today? Is a Reconstruction era for Black people?
Yeah, one could call it that way.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
right.
a parallel. Absolutely. I mean, it's just a way of opening up things again. I think that the difference, there's numerous difference, but at least in my opinion, the biggest difference is hindsight is 2020. You should know historically what's coming. There will be a backlash. There's no question. We've seen it, but it's going to get worse before it gets better, in my opinion. I mean, I have hope. I always have hope, but understand the reality. Backlash is coming.
What?
I got a question though. So, I mean, I see a lot of organizations. I mean, they're really taking strong stances against racism. Strong stances. I mean, Aunt Jemima, they're gonna take that off the boxes. Uncle Ben's, Cream of Wheat. They're even looking at Mrs. Butterworth. I mean, these are like really big things. And many of the universities in the South, you know, Clemson University, they're working on trying to get these buildings that are named after Confederate soldiers you know, off the building. Robert E. Lee statues are being removed. You know, one of the things that I would like to see personally, you know, at the beginning, I mean, in December, the University of Cincinnati removed McMicken from the College of Arts and Sciences, but you still have McMicken Hall, McMicken Circle, and some of these other things. I think the university came up short with that. I love my university, but they came up short with that, and I think they need to make the call to remove not only Marge Schott's name from the stadium, but also remove McMicken's name from the campus. But yes, if you can answer, or
is that a question?
Is there a question? We're going to leave you out of this, Dr. Wright.
Yes.
Dr. Wright, we're going to leave you out of this.
Yeah, we'll leave you out of there
somehow. I'm switching to my lawyer head. I have the back of my mind, I want to go to law school one day.
I mean, so you said things will get...
There's a question.
Yeah, so no, but you had mentioned that things are going to get worse. But I see these companies making some big strides. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, worse meaning that there's always a remnant of resistance.
Of course.
The resistance of political power. I mean, it's simple. It's because it's like people don't understand the resistance to the status quo. It's ingrained in the system. There's systematic political and economic structures that benefit from the status quo. I mean, it's just what it is. It's just, I'm not saying people shouldn't be happy. It's just walking a fine line. It's like Frederick Douglass says, there's no progress without struggle. And so the struggle will continue. It's just part of being a person of color in the United States. You just struggle. It's just what it is. It's just be prepared that this is not become easy. If it was easy, it would be fixed. I always tell people, they're like, wow, when is this gonna end? If it was that easy, it would be fixed. It's not. It's just a struggle. It's just a struggle. It's the United States of America that's built on amorous and race and exploitation. I mean, it's just what it is.
Yeah.
Dr. Wright, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, if we continue this discussion of the Reconstruction era, and if we are in one, there are many of us who argue that we are currently in one, but it's the third Reconstruction.
Right.
As Dr. Jackson said previously, the first Reconstruction we talked about before, 1860s, was the backlash against it. As Dr. Jackson said, the Ku Klux Klan. And actually their first meeting was held at the Maxwell Millennium Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. And that is exactly the location of a conference that I will be, was supposed to attend this fall until it was canceled, in Nashville this fall. And we had planned on creating several sessions dedicated to that conversation around the space we were in, and understanding that there is a renewed interest and support for that organization and what they believe in. The second Reconstruction, after the civil rights movement of the 1960s, was the backlash against that? Extreme conservatism. So the issue became not necessarily that Black people are being oppressed because of the system or the man. You're poor because you want to sell drugs. You're poor because you're having all these babies. You're poor because you just lack a good work ethic. How are we going to handle that? We are going to bring in people who are very conservative, who are going to enact policies that roll back many progressive policies, whether that's limiting the amount of student loan money one can have to go to college, whether that's implementing harsh 3 strikes rules for crimes, mandatory minimums that elevated the number of men and women in prison, that then led to the prison, the private prison industry, which is a whole nother conversation itself. So what the era we're in now is this new Black Lives Matter era, where we are seeing what some may perceive as progress, changing names, getting rid of Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, statues. Yeah, all that is fine and dandy, but that's, to me, that's superficial. What are the policies that are going to impact the long-term institutional suppression and oppression of Black people in the United States? How much money are you going to give to HBCUs? And not just, as the company did the other day, not just Morehouse, Spelman, and Hampton. They get all the money. But what about Central State in Ohio? What about Kentucky State? What about Dillard University? And what about Cheney? All these other schools. So we are definitely, I believe, in a third Reconstruction. And in many ways, it started with Obama. So the first part of that blowback was 45.
That's a good point. Nah, that's a very, very good point. So I want to just get you all's quick opinion on, if it's okay to talk of politics real quick, on the upcoming political race, right? The upcoming presidential race and Biden. Do you all have any reservations with him in regards to what he's done in the past? Or is it just, yo, he's better than what we have in there now? Let's go ahead and vote for him. Dr. Jackson, you over there getting weak. What's going on?
Man.
What's going through your brain?
For me, and I'm not even trying to proselytize. See, my faith is never in men or men in a structure that's grounded in flaws. So I never particularly put my faith in one man or one institution, because it's just flawed. It's flawed. And so I'm not really, I mean, you have to vote because you have a system of voting, but at the end of the day, like, I mean, African Americans have and then people of color have a spiritual plane that they rely on. And so what part of that do you want to rely on? What part of that do you want to reach back for to invigorate your journey? Because we're all flawed human beings. And I'm not answering the question. It's just like, I don't look for one man to change the whole structure. I don't even look at the structure to change. It's just not going to change. It's built on division and amorous. It's not built on kindness and coming together and let's change the structure because of the betterment of the whole. Because at the heart, I'm a colonial historian. People don't understand from a colonial historical perspective what the nation was based on. These are ingrained structures that's been there from the beginning. Ingrained structures. When Thomas Jefferson writing the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and endowed by certain rights, among those life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, he's owning over 300 people who's enslaved who are of color. So it's like, this stuff is ingrained in a structure. So I'm not saying don't vote and don't believe in whatever candidate you want to believe in. It's just at the end of the day, it's a systematic structure that's built on exploitation and amorous.
Mo, you got something you wanted to say?
Any
You have a
system
question,
would be
Mo?
better.
I'm gonna let Dr. Wright chime in. We can't hear you, Dr. Wright.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, a counter to that or an addendum would be the over-reliance one may have on religion, as he talked about the Souls of Black Folk religious fatalism, and the idea that for many of us, we know that African Americans are the most religious group of any group, as judged by church attendance and other such numbers. But if you rely on it solely and say, I'm going to turn the other cheek because God says so, I'm just going to love my enemy, I'm not going to do unto others because I want to make sure that one day when I leave this world, I'm going to get my wings and my robe and walk down streets paved with gold, drinking milk and honey. Well, according to Du Bois, it's fine to believe in religion. People think he was against religion. He wasn't. He believed in religion. But that doesn't mean you should sacrifice fighting in the here and now. So when you look at the way in which, getting back to your question, JeRod, this whole issue of Biden and whomever the candidates are, as Dr. Jackson said, we cannot put our faith totally or exclusively in man, but we cannot to quote, I think, President Obama, we cannot let perfect be the enemy of good. Does Biden have everything and the qualities that I want? No. To be honest, Elizabeth Warren was my person. I think she's the best qualified for the job. But he is who we have. And it's a less, not necessarily a lesser of two evils deal, but you have to pick the best choice to get us to where we want to be eventually. Which course is going to?
I appreciate that. I appreciate that from both of you. I've been to several meetings with different organizations throughout the city of Cincinnati who are talking about different things, and I've seen the vibe, right? And one of my concerns is that with all of this momentum for Black people, there are this organization A asking for this, which is counterproductive to what organization B is asking for. Seeing how powerful W.E.B, Du Bois, and Booker T could have been, what advice would you give to someone looking to mend fences or bring organizations together for a greater cause, being the historians that you all are?
I would jump in.
Go ahead.
Yeah. As you were articulating that question, I thought about a sermon speech that I heard recently that I have often listened to over the years by Martin Luther King Jr. Called The Drum Major Instinct, and how many of us love to be the drum major. The drum major gets all the attention, high stepping and kicking and all that. But not everyone can be the drum major. Not everyone should be the drum major. Sometimes it's like the saying goes, know your role. So we need to be critical and selective about whom we put our energies into. And not all drum majors are the proper ones to follow. For many of us, we are better serving the goal if we are simply servants. If we are the ones doing the heavy leg work, whether that's in the civil rights days, stereotypically, the women were not allowed to assume leadership positions. They were behind the scenes making phone calls, cooking, and all these other quote unquote women duties. And if you were gay or lesbian, like Bed Rustin was, because of your orientation, sexual orientation, you were not allowed to be on the front stage, although he's the one who organized the March on Washington and other early civil rights movement activities. So the idea of the organizations competing, I would argue, is to try to be critical, or have them be critical about why are they doing it? Are they doing it for self-aggrandizing reasons? Or are they truly in for the uplift of the whole unit? If they are in for the uplift of the whole unit, then maybe comprising those units together would be the best outcome.
I appreciate that. Dr. Jackson, do you have anything you want to add?
No, he said it succinctly. I mean, I would just go back to the phrase, have a plan. I mean, plan to succeed. you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. I mean, what positions link institutions together you should focus on, as opposed to what issues divide the movement? Like what brings together? Like what are the key goals that bring all these different groups together? Lay them out. What are they? Is it funding for public schools that are not as well as they should be funded in urban areas because they're based on taxpayer dollars that nobody wants to deal with, because when people move out of the urban core, they take their tax money with them and nobody wants to deal with that stuff because you have to figure out how to fund schools better, or you deal with this big bubble that's going to explode, racial disparities in healthcare. That's an issue that's just exacerbated with the coronavirus. It's not like it just fell out of the sky. That's been embedded for how many decades or centuries? That's not new stuff. It's like people didn't know. I mean, that's the question I always ask folks when they're like, we didn't know. Like, what were you looking at? Right. You're in healthcare. Like, how did you not know? How did you
I want to stay in that pocket real quick, Mr. Jackson, because this is the second time that you kind of emphasized healthcare. And you said this bubble that is about to explode. Can you give us a little bit more insight on what you're thinking in regards to the health disparities with race?
And before you go there, I do want to plug that on July 10th, we have the discussion is going to be on health disparities in the African American community, featuring Kiana Trebu from Health Collaborative and Ryan Adcock from Cradle Cincinnati. So that's going to be a great one. Can't wait to talk about that. Would love if you two viewed on that one, because it's interesting that you bring this up. So go ahead, Dr. Jackson. I'm sorry.
Well, there's two reasons I bring it up. I mean, I know so many nurses. Yes. I know so many doctors. I mean, Black doctors in particular. And as a nation, you have a country whose healthcare eats up maybe, I want to say 18 to 20% of their GDP, gross national product of the nation, which is totally double or triple if you talk about the disparities within the Black community. So how much money are you spending on healthcare? It's not going down, and it's not going to stay the same. It will continue to expand when you have it based purely on making money off of pharmaceuticals, insurance companies, and hospitals. Churning money, just churning money. And I'm not even talking about people in particular. I'm talking about a system that allows that to function. They're just churning money. There's no lobby against pharmaceuticals. There's no lobby against insurance industries. There's none of that stuff. And so African Americans, it's like when I had a discussion in my college, and the names are irrelevant. So I run a Black Studies program in my college, and I was putting a curriculum together where people who are going into nursing should take one whole class on African Americans, because African Americans tend to have a propensity of hypertension, sickle cell anemia, and so forth. So you might want to know something about their culture. So the pushback was, we have a certain number of hours that our people need to have as nurses, so we don't have time. Wow. And I'm like, for real? Wow. They're gonna go out and be nurses in urban communities and they know nothing about their population, like zero. That's just nurses. I'm not talking about how many African-American doctors we don't have or dentists we don't have. I'm just talking about healthcare from nurses. Can't get one nurse to take one class on the history of African-Americans to know your culture. What does that tell you?
I think that continues the health disparities. I think the health equity, it continues that in our communities. You know, that's why many of us are that may have are staying away from the hospital when it comes to these different things. So yeah, Dr. Wright, any thoughts?
Well, as Dr. Jackson was talking about the ways in which there's a systemic attempt within the health industry to negatively impact Blacks, I also thought about what works in tandem with that is something I alluded to earlier. Privatization of prisons.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that we make a marketplace out of putting people in jail. And the state of Ohio was the first to sell a private prison, to sell a prison to a private company. So for those who
State of Ohio was.
State of Ohio. So for those who don't know what a private prison is, it's like saying if we all are gonna pool our monies together and open a McDonald's, how are we gonna make money? By selling burgers and selling fries and selling milkshakes. If we pool our money together and open a private prison, how are we gonna make money? We need people in there. So we are going to influence lawmakers. So that's how you have the mandatory minimum sentences, the crack versus powder cocaine disparity in sentences, the 3 strikes.
One of the biggest crimes ever.
Exactly, 3 strikes and you're out, 3 strikes and life penalty. So over the past 20 years, you had an exponential increase in the number of primarily Black and brown people going to jail. It became a profit motive behind that. So when you look at the ways in which Blacks are being attacked, not only in health, but also in the over-policing of communities that lead to this money-making industry, it crystallizes the many challenges that Blacks face and why you see people in the streets. And one thing I tell my students in my class, understand the pain. Don't just turn on the TV and say, oh, those people are crazy. What's wrong with them tearing up their own property and everything? There's a reason they're doing this. They have a level of understanding of racial inequality that maybe at this level and yours is here. Mm-hmm. They're responding to generations and years and decades of oppression, of direct and indirect oppression that my granddaddy and them had. Those stories that grandma told me about being raped by a white man, which is my grandmother, and the way that impacted her for the remainder of her life. So when you see us acting a fool in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in Cincinnati a few years ago.
Cincinnati, I was just getting ready to say.
Not just go out there and do damage for some unorthodox reason. We have built up frustration and tension about the inequality that Blacks have experienced and continue to experience in this nation.
Mo, did you have something you wanted to say?
He got it.
Okay. I think it's beautiful that both of you can connect institutional racism and the biases that are going on at a ground level, right? And how it's foundational. What would be your suggestions if you're organizing, or even if you're talking to your students who are curious about what can I do, right? I know you said know your role, right? But what's something generic or something general that I can do to start propelling the Black race forward, knowing my history and those things?
And I might add also to that question, what about allies, people that want to be allies? If you can speak to that as well.
I would say to those in the Black community who are looking for something to do, one is be true to yourself. Be honest with yourself. Know your strengths and know your weaknesses. One thing I pride myself on is being self-aware. I know what I can do well. I know what I can't do well. So in many situations, I'm not going to try to be, as King said, the drum major. My role may be sitting back, engaging in correspondences, writing the official press releases. So once you understand what your skill set is and accept the fact that although you may want the shine, you may want the spotlight, you may want that glow and the attention that comes with it, you may better serve yourself and the movement by sitting back, playing your role, doing it to the best of your ability. But that comes with a bit of hubris. And as for the allies, my belief and thoughts on the allies is similar to something I saw on social media, which is I don't want allies, I want accomplices.
That's fine.
Hold on, let me write that. Hold on, let me type that.
But go into detail, Dr. Wright. Go into detail, Dr. Wright.
Well, that just suggests degrees of interaction. An ally will stand on the sideline and say, you know what, I support Black Lives Matter. I may give you a few dollars to your cause. I may talk to my white friend or whatever. An accomplice is in front of City Hall a few years ago with the Sam Du Bois marches, like I saw many of our white brothers and sisters doing. An accomplice is willing to get pepper sprayed by the police. An accomplice is willing to get what they call a rubber bullet stuck in their head. I almost said something. Stuck in the No, I'm thinking I saw the picture.
Right.
Supposedly rubber bullet stuck in this young lady's head, and her eye is permanently, she's blind. Those are accomplices. They're willing to put their lives on the line the same way as Black people are. Being an ally is cool, but I'd rather have an accomplice than an ally.
Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you. Dr. Jackson.
What was the question again?
Yeah, the question
Because
was,
he already answered.
No, right.
he threw some fire out there, didn't he? Didn't he? No,
I
just
know. You
if
want me
there
to
was
follow
any-
that up?
if there was anything that you could give, any suggestions that you could give for people, and this time being a historian, being how you've studied history, you've seen different movements, you've learned from different movements, how to propel this movement forward for the greater good of the nation, for the greater good of Black people and people in general. What would be your advice to people, if any?
I mean, obviously, as a historian, I would say study history and ask the questions of the institutions. I mean, once you study like the basic foundation of the United States, study the basic foundation of the United States and ask questions. When you're going through an educational process, K through 12, and I say that people don't believe it. To me, there's no such thing as dumb questions. Nobody knows everything. I surely don't. Even if I have a PhD, I mean, even with my PhD, I know, as I tell people, I know a little bit about this little bit that I studied at this time in this moment. I don't know a whole lot of other stuff. I definitely don't know anything in math and science. I'm a historian. But what I do know is I know how to ask the right questions. Like, why are you not studying in math and science people of color? There's got to be somewhere. Like, why is that not being taught? Why can't you see yourself in the curriculum K through 12 somewhere as a person of color? Why are you not seeing it? Like, what is going on here? There's enough scholarship and research out there. You can find it if you ask the right question. Why are you not getting that stuff? Why do you feel alienated going there because you don't see yourself in the curriculum? Why is that still going on in 2020? Why is that? So ask the questions of the institutions and then start organizing, but you have to have the right questions to press them on it.
I think that could lead to a lot of white splaining.
And to add on, an inflection point, because for too long, many of our white allies, going back to the allies versus accomplices, many of our allies have been comfortable not asking questions. Because if I ask questions to grandma, grandpa, mom, and daddy, then I'm going to find that, you mean all my life you've been lying to me? You've been telling me these things about certain people that's wrong? Surely that can't be true. Mom and dad wouldn't lie to me. Grandma wouldn't tell me to think a certain way because she goes to church every week. Granddad's a deacon. We're good people. So I'd rather be comfortable in my ignorance, in the traditional sense of not knowing and not expanding their knowledge base. So what I see now is a lot of non-Black people becoming more comfortable asking questions, which is heartening to me.
That's good. That's good. Gentlemen, I have nothing. I appreciate this conversation. I think it was definitely fruitful. I actually do have one thing. I want you all's feedback on something. There's been recently, we know what happened in Bethel, Ohio, right? Dr. Wright, are you familiar with what happened in Bethel? I know you went back to the north.
JeRod, tell us what happened in Bethel.
So, I'm going to tell you what happened in Bethel, Ohio.
Okay. What happened in Bethel, Ohio?
There was a protest, a Black Lives Matter protest in Bethel, Ohio. During this protest, there was what I would like to call at this point, right, with the information that I have, a white accomplice who stood out and he was protesting for Black Lives Matter. This white man, this white accomplice was hit. He was stolen on, right, while protesting for Black Lives Matter. There was a policeman right in front. and there was a policeman right behind him. So the act was seen. No arrest was made. Nothing was happened. Nothing happened to any of the people. Basically, he was ran off for protesting. So that Black Lives Matter. So I just want to know, what is your take on that situation, and how should that be responded to from you all's opinion, your expert opinion?
Dr. Jackson, you gotta go first. I seen that look on your face.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know the right way. There's so many angles on stuff because I'm on so many levels of this stuff. You have a whole history of police brutality from the beginning of the United States. Plus, I have personal time. I mean, my brothers are police officers in Chicago, so uncles were police officers. Friends of mine are police officers in Cincinnati. So you got African Americans police officers who are going through trauma and mental stuff going on in their heads. Like the right answer, I'm not sure what the right answer. I know what we're doing is not the right answer. What the right answer is, I don't know. I know just the road we're going down is not good. I try not to do Band-Aid approach, because we down this road, we didn't get here yesterday. We didn't get here last week. We didn't get here 10 years ago. We didn't get here 20 years ago.
Keep going.
Here a decade ago. So you got the underpinnings of centuries and centuries of stuff. You have to get at the foundation of this stuff. And that's why I get back to education. If you didn't know that there's a long history of using police officers or so-called police officers to hunt down runaway, enslaved African Americans during the time of enslavement, and it was legal, and that just continues almost 200 years later, you don't even know the right question to ask because you don't know the history. So for me, it's like you got to study the history and know the underpinnings of your structures. This is not new stuff. You just have cameras now. It's been going on for over 200 years, if not more.
Dr. Wright?
My position is very simple. The little catchphrase I always use, I'm just a country boy from Memphis, Tennessee, who somehow stumbled into this profession.
And Tennessee.
Exactly. The North Memphis.
I love Rendezvous, by the way. That's my favorite. Rendezvous is my favorite.
I need to take you to the other side of town.
Courtney?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. I need to.
We're gonna talk offline about that. You gotta
I just said that, you know, man. You gotta give Memphis some love.
You guys doing sidebars.
You gotta give Memphis some love. Go ahead, Dr. Wright. I'm sorry.
I simply think we need to call out bad actors. And sometimes it's not just one or two bad apples. It's the whole bushel and barrel of them in some instances. And I also have friends, no relatives, but friends, numerous friends who are officers in Memphis and in other places, Buffalo, New York, and other places. And I compare it to situations I've seen and heard of throughout my career, where I have heard of situations where faculty would knowingly make decisions regarding certain students that were obviously unfair. And it was obvious that multiple other faculty knew. And there comes a time when the good actors have to stand up and say, you know what? It's not gonna go down like that. We have to expose that, even if it means sacrificing our relationship or something even more grand. And I would apply that to the situation in Bethel also. If we know that there are individuals who saw that act happening and turned the proverbial blind eye, then the good actors in that situation need to step up, because to not do that will intensify the distrust that communities of color have against policing institutions.
It was a white guy, by the way, who got stolen. I think that should be, just want to make.
That doesn't matter.
Okay.
What matters is what is right and what is wrong.
Right.
That's the key. And the good actors, regardless of race, ethnicity, orientation, age, physical ability, what have you, the good actors must stand up and squash the BS.
No, and I agree with you, Dr. Wright. And the reason why I said it was a white guy is because you referenced people of color standing up. And I think it's important that we stand up for our white accomplices as well. When someone's willing to fight by you on the battle line, I think it's important that you stand up and you fight by them as well. So I appreciate that. Mo, do you got anything?
Oh yeah. So, Dr. Jackson, there's a book that you were talking about earlier. There's a book that you please tell us about it, because Dr. Wright, I've already got your book on order, so thank you.
Which book are you talking about? My book or?
Yes, the latest one.
Oh, hold on.
There we go.
Give me a sec.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And then after he talks a little about his book, if you can just do a little wrap up about you know, why people put Booker T and W.E.B. Du Bois against each other, and I kind of like how you all tied it together. So if we can just do a little wrap up, then we'll be finished for today. Go ahead, Dr. Jackson.
So my book is called Let Freedom Ring for Everyone, the Diversity of Our Nation. It looks at what's going on from a race, ethnicity, and immigration perspective, because there's a whole component of immigration that people kind of miss. You have different groups that have started to immigrate to the United States have become, for some people, scapegoats. And it's just intensified. So it's called Let Freedom Ring for Everyone, the Diversity of Our Nation. I'll send you the link later.
Okay.
And the other has to do with Du Bois and Booker T kind of debating. I think it just simplifies complexities. I mean, because they weren't arch enemies, as people want to put them together. And you have to also recognize it that they are, quote, creatures of their time period. They're functioning in a time period that's totally, in some ways, different than ours. They're functioning, particularly for Booker Washington, he's functioning under segregation. He's functioning under a system where you legally are not supposed to have access to political power, racial segregation. And so he's trying to navigate this thing under that system, but he's not far away from Du Bois. It's just people want to put them together because it's easier. It's like when I watch, like now watching shows that are trying to put African-Americans against African-American athletes. Who's on what side, who's on the other side. Like kind of squash that thing because you're going in the same direction. It's just, there's different ways to get to the end game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and my answer to that question is similar, but it emphasizes the idea that we just want simple answers sometimes. You know, we live in an increasingly anti-intellectual society.
Mm.
So when we talk about these complex issues, many times, or most times, there's nuance into why certain decisions were made, why certain policies were passed, why certain policies were not passed. But if you're writing an intro to sociology textbook or intro to history textbook, it's too many words. It's too difficult to get through. So let's just say Du Bois good, Washington bad, Washington good, Du Bois bad. Cut to the chase, move on to something else.
Yep.
So we want to oversimplify things. So if we can not do that and take more time to, one, integrate a Black studies, I'll say, curriculum into education at the lower levels, then we'll have a better understanding of all these complex issues when we get to college and beyond, instead of giving, in theory, a white or Black student who has had little to no contact with Black studies or Black history material in college and expect them to fully grasp the nuances and be able to regurgitate it to you in that one class they're going to take, make them take, and then become a productive citizen. So it's all about expanding our willingness to grapple with these issues and engaging them in more complex ways.
Hey, Mo, do you got an extra 5 minutes, Mo? Dr. Jackson,
hey.
Dr. Wright? All right.
Long as they do.
Dr. Jackson, Dr. Wright, do y'all have an extra 5 minutes?
I'm good.
All right. So we're going to call this overtime. Dr. Wright and I was having a conversation a couple weeks ago. Dr. Wright, I'm not going to say the name of the person Dr. Wright has a certain disdain for, but he brought up a good point. The point that Dr. Wright brought up is that CNN had a certain person on national television, and this person didn't have any academia scholarship. And I won't say that the person doesn't have knowledge about the topic that they were speaking on, but they weren't a scholar. So maybe they didn't have as much knowledge. And I think that kind of goes to what you were just discussing, Dr. Wright, correct me if I'm wrong, and the fact that sometimes we put the entertainer before the educator to speak to the public and speak for the public. Can you give your thoughts on that?
JeRod, I think I know who you're talking about. Can I just say the name of the person? Is that okay?
I'm gonna leave that up to Dr. Wright, man.
Okay, all right.
If I remember correctly, we were talking about
Charlemagne the God. Okay.
I was questioning why he is on these platforms. I understand the his stature in the music industry, radio industry, I guess, and his mass appeal on certain levels. But when you're talking about complex issues of race and ethnicity that require nuance, why in fact are, and this is not begrudging him at all. If they call me, I'm gonna pick up the phone because I want that spotlight also. But why are these producers calling entertainers, athletes, and other individuals who have not done the necessary work? That's just like calling me to give commentary on why Bob Costas is not a great sports announcer. Doesn't make sense. So I think in many cases we need to put people in the proper position to successfully inform the masses in ways that does not simplify or mischaracterize the scenario in such a way that by the time the person who is not trained in that area finishes talking, even those who previously disagree with them will agree with that simplified notion of how they're looking at the world, which is counterproductive to the best interests of Black people.
Thank you. Dr. Jackson, any feedback?
Well, I think Charlemagne the God, I'm not surprised by CNN because it's about ratings. You want to find something that fits your demographic and you want people to look at it. It's not about getting at the real complex issues of what you need to resolve an issue. It's about getting numbers. And I'm not even mad at Charlemagne. It's like it gives him a platform to get more numbers on his shows. I mean, it's just what it is. Like I keep telling people, it's a systems argument. I mean, why would you go on CNN? You got, what, 5 minutes to do a spiel on a complex issue? It's not going to happen no way.
Right. Regardless.
Somebody's getting paid somehow because your numbers are jumping. You want that demographics to look at that particular program at that particular time so somebody can be happy with the numbers. I mean, I ain't mad at you, but just put a disclaimer up the front and says, he's not a scholar. We ain't talking about complex issues to get the conclusion to it. We just trying to get some numbers. I'm good with it. Just tell me the truth. I'm fine. I mean, don't try to sham, folks. Say we just looking at this for ratings. I'm good.
I appreciate that. Thank you, fellas. I appreciate y'all standing a little bit over. I appreciate the perspective. I appreciate you all's time. Mo?
Hey, thank you all. Dr. Jackson, I will be in touch. Dr. Wright, I'm going to give you a buzz and talk to you. I do have your number. Thank you. I just want to reiterate, you know, JeRod and I have been doing this. This is our, which number episode?
Nine.
This is our 9th episode of the discussion, right? And we've had some amazing people on. And to have you two gentlemen on to talk about this, you know, discussion on W.E.B. and Booker T. Washington was amazing. And I thank you for accepting our invitations to do this. Again, our mission of the discussion was to provide, you know, an outlet and have a conversation about different topics that affect our community. And I do think that, you know, and mind you, we started this before, you know, George Floyd. You know, we had just heard about Ahmaud Arbery.
No, at that point, we haven't even heard about it. This was during COVID.
Exactly. Right. This was a COVID thing. Right. And, you know, they started talking about the health disparities and these many different things. So our episodes have really evolved with the times. And I think being able to stay relevant is great. And this was like right on time on Juneteenth. It was great. And I really, Dr. Jackson, Dr. Wright, thank you so much. Just from the bottom of my heart. Bottom of my heart. I can't say it enough. I'll probably say it a couple more times before we get off the air. But Thank you, and thank you. And I look forward to learning more from you all. I'm ordering both of these books. I already put the link up for your book, Dr. Jackson. I put the one up for your book. I know you all have some other publications as well. I'll be checking those out, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you all, and y'all have a great weekend. Have a great Juneteenth weekend.
Happy Juneteenth.
Yes, happy
Thank you.
Juneteenth.
You too, man.
All right, thank you all. You have a great one. Okay. All right.
You too.